The key to the front door turned with a cheerful click-clack sound. A sound that for 20 years had always meant safety. This time it was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. I had been gone for exactly 6 weeks, taking care of my aging, sickly mother who lived 3 states away. The trip was a sacrifice, one I made willingly. I expected a warm, mist hug, a banner saying, "Welcome home, Mom." Instead, I stepped over the threshold and walked straight into a cold, hard tableau of betrayal. My husband, Robert, was hunched over the marble kitchen counter, his shoulders shaking in rhythmic, silent agony. He wasn't just crying, he was broken. The man who had faced down stock market crashes and major surgery, without shedding a single tear, was weeping like a lost boy. But the sound that ripped the breath from my lungs wasn't his muffled sobs. It was the clear, bell-like, delighted laugh of my daughter Olivia. She was sitting in the formal dining room, the expensive mahogany table covered with glossy brochures and legal documents. Across from her sat the smug, predatory faces of the Sterlings, her fiancé Victor and his parents Helen and Arthur. They were radiating an aura of victory so potent it felt like physical heat. Olivia looked up as I entered. Her eyes, which used to crinkle with childhood joy, were now hard, glittering chips of ice. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't even stop smiling. "Oh, look who decided to grace us with her presence," Olivia purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and undeniable malice. She gestured casually toward the crumpled stack of papers in front of her father. "Did you have a nice little retirement away from all this mess, Mom? Good. Because frankly, you were just cluttering up the paperwork." Then her true motive, the poison I'd suspected but refused to believe, spilled out. She leaned forward, the Sterling matriarch, Helen, placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. "The truth is, Robert was being sentimental about the house, and we needed to finalize the transfer before he had a chance to get weepy and change his mind," Olivia declared, her voice suddenly loud and authoritative. She smiled straight at me, a cold, triumphant flash of teeth. "Consider this your new reality, Helen. The trip is over. And so is your stay here." I stood perfectly still, my travel bag slipping from my numb fingers, hitting the polished hardwood floor with a dull thud. Every instinct screamed at me to rush to Robert, to slap Olivia, to throw the Sterlings out. But I didn't. I just stared at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face, who had orchestrated the utter destruction of her own father. The pain was astronomical and immediate, total emotional demolition. My heart shattered in my chest, but I felt a strange, chilling calm descend over my mind. I took a deep breath, composed my face into an expressionless mask, and forced a small, utterly cold smile because there was something my dear, greedy daughter didn't know. To understand the knife she plunged into my back today, you have to understand the gentle, unsuspecting incision she made 6 months earlier. The trip I had just returned from, the one Olivia so casually dismissed as a little retirement, was not the beginning of my absence, but the terrible culmination of 6 months of psychic exhaustion. My true vulnerability began with the diagnosis that shattered our perfect, comfortable world. It was a Tuesday in late spring. Robert, normally a pillar of quiet strength and sharp wit, had been uncharacteristically foggy. He forgot their anniversary lunch. He left the car running in the driveway for an hour. We were sitting in the neurologist's office, the sterile white walls amplifying the dread, when the doctor, Dr. Cohen, used the phrase that became the low hum of our new reality: mild cognitive impairment, progressing toward early-stage Alzheimer's. It wasn't a death sentence, but it was a life sentence for the Robert the First knew. He was devastated, not for himself but for me. He was terrified of becoming a burden, of losing control, of subjecting me to the slow, agonizing watch. "Helen," he pleaded later that night, holding my hands, "you have to promise me you'll protect yourself. I don't want my mistake, this failing brain, to take everything we built." Our assets were substantial, built over 30 years of his successful financial career, and my strategic real estate investments. The centerpiece was the house, a sprawling 3-story Tudor overlooking the bay, known in the family simply as the Anchor. It wasn't just wood and stone. It was the repository of our lives. My vulnerability lay in my fierce, protective love for Robert, and his sudden irrational paranoia about the future. To ease his anxiety about leaving me destitute, or making a catastrophic financial error, Dr. Cohen advised simplifying his immediate financial and legal obligations. Robert insisted on transferring several smaller, liquid investment accounts into Olivia's name, not as an inheritance, but as a temporary, easily accessible fund should his health suddenly deteriorate while I was preoccupied. "She's your daughter, Helen. She'll look out for you. She's getting married, she's established." "It's a pragmatic move," he'd argued, his voice brittle with misplaced trust. I hated the idea. Olivia had been exhibiting a troubling entitlement ever since her engagement to Victor Sterling. But Robert's anxiety was mounting, leading to panic attacks. To save my husband's sanity, I acquiesced. I signed the papers relinquishing joint control over the funds, under the strict written condition that these accounts were only to be accessed with my express written consent, unless Robert was deemed legally incapacitated. It was a concession to his need for control in a world spinning out of it. This was the deep pain. Sacrificing my financial peace to secure my husband's emotional well-being, simultaneously creating the perfect opening for my daughter's betrayal. 2 months later, my own mother suffered a severe fall. I was torn in two. Robert, though ailing, was stable, requiring structure more than intensive care. My mother needed round-the-clock physical assistance. Olivia, seeing her chance, insisted I go. "Go, Mom," she'd said, embracing me tightly, a gesture that felt less like love and more like a predator closing its jaws. "Dad and I will hold down the fort. We're a team, right? You deserve this break." The trip was an 8-week commitment to duty, a necessary absence that sealed my fate. The second I left, Olivia got to work, not as a caregiver but as a corporate raider. Olivia's caregiving was a masterclass in insidious manipulation, and I was given the sickening details only in scattered, innocent-sounding phone calls from Robert. The moment my plane landed 3 states away, Olivia began restructuring our home, transforming it into her personal stage for the Sterling courtship. Her pretext was always security and Dad's health. "Mom, I just want Dad to feel safe," she'd say on the phone, while her actions contradicted every word. The first move, the installation of a new state-of-the-art security system. Robert mentioned it with pride, saying Olivia had finally brought the house into the 21st century. What he failed to mention was that she had used this installation to swap the physical locks on Robert's home office and our primary filing cabinet, giving only herself and the Sterlings the new digital access codes. She framed it as protecting his vulnerable accounts from opportunistic caregivers. Her most potent form of pretend care, however, was integrating the Sterlings into our daily family life. Victor, a smooth, ambitious lawyer, began dropping by daily, ostensibly to check in on Mr. Anderson's estate plan. His parents, Helen and Arthur, started hosting lavish, expensive dinners for Robert at the Anchor, always inviting Olivia, but always citing long travel as the reason they couldn't host me upon my return. "The Sterlings are such a comfort, Helen," Robert told me once, his voice heavy with gratitude. "They treat me like a king. They say they see me as a partner, a mentor. They're so impressed with the house and my career." Olivia was feeding his male vanity, the one part of him that felt threatened by his diagnosis. She wasn't caring for him, she was grooming him. She isolated him, removing his social network by canceling his weekly bridge game and his golf outings, claiming the activity was too stressful. She took over his medication schedule, which in hindsight was a terrifying thought. The manipulation was so subtle and wrapped in a veneer of filial piety that only an outsider, or the victim of a prior corporate takeover, could recognize it. The calls were always about how much she was sacrificing. "It's hard, Mom, but I'm managing Dad's bills and making sure he takes his walks. I even put my wedding planning on hold." Her kindness was a financial ledger. Every meal, every comforting word, every canceled social event was a line item in the debt owed column, ready to be cashed out with interest. The emotional distance I felt, being relegated to a supporting voice on a speakerphone while she orchestrated a life in my home, was the slow burn that built the tension. I was replaced and I was paying for the replacement. But it was only a replacement of presence, not of authority. The key documents were safe. Or so I believed. The escalation from subtle sabotage to overt entitlement occurred 4 weeks before my scheduled return, and it was a public declaration of war disguised as practical efficiency. I was on a video call with Robert, who looked pale and tired but was trying to be cheerful. Suddenly, the focus of the camera shifted, and I heard Olivia's crisp, businesslike voice in the background. "Dad, you really shouldn't be sentimental about this heavy old thing. It's a liability." I heard a heavy grating sound of wood scraping across the parquet floor. "Robert, what is that sound?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. Robert cleared his throat, avoiding the camera. "Oh, nothing, dear. Olivia is just tidying up the study. She thinks the Louis XV writing desk is too large for the room now that she's installing the new video conferencing equipment." My Louis XV desk. It wasn't just a piece of antique furniture. It was the desk I inherited from my grandmother, where I wrote my first successful investment proposal, where I signed the papers for the very land the anchor stood on. It was a symbol of my contribution, my legacy. It was Helen's desk, not the family's. Tidying up? "Robert, don't let her touch that desk. It's fragile. It's mine," I insisted, my voice tight with sudden protective fury. Olivia glided into the frame, leaning over her father's shoulder, a perfect, condescending smirk painted across her face. "Don't be dramatic, Mom," she said, her tone the sickeningly patronizing one reserved for children and the infirm. "It's already been moved. And honestly, it's not to your taste anymore." Helen Sterling's interior designer Bryce looked at it. He said the gilt needed extensive restoration, and it would be better suited for a new environment. "I've already put it on consignment." "Consignment where? To whom?" I demanded. "To a private buyer through Bryce. He offered a very fair price, Mom. A generous price considering its condition. It's already gone, Helen. And honestly, that money is going straight into Dad's discretionary fund. See, I'm protecting him. You should be thanking me for saving you the hassle of dealing with it when you get back." It was a cold-blooded declaration of possession. She hadn't asked. She hadn't consulted. She hadn't sold a family artifact. She had symbolically sold my place in the home. It was her way of saying, "I own the narrative, I own the assets, and your sentiments mean nothing." I hung up the phone that day shaking, not just from anger, but from a profound understanding of the threat. She wasn't just planning to inherit. She was actively clearing the house of any trace of my authority and history. The desk was the first visible piece of my dignity she had stripped away. It was a test, and I failed the test by being absent and furious, rather than present and prepared. The moment the line went dead, I didn't waste time on tears. I went to the locked safe my mother kept in her study, the safe containing the documents that had survived 2 world wars and 5 generations. I pulled out a thin, yellowing legal file, the original meticulously detailed prenuptial agreement Robert and I had signed, an agreement Olivia had been told was lost decades ago. I knew then that the fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about defining the family. Was it a bond of love, or was it a contract of pure predatory greed? Olivia had chosen her side, and I was about to choose mine. The first insult, the casual, cold-blooded disposal of the Louis XV desk, had clarified the battlefield. Olivia wasn't just consolidating her power. She was financially leveraging it. The consignment money for the desk was a pittance, but it proved she was willing to liquidate my personal property without remorse. I knew the next move would be the biggest, the anchor itself. While caring for my mother, I began working on 2 hours of sleep, using the time between medication schedules to conduct my own counter-investigation. I had retained access to my personal private offshore financial accounts, the war chest Robert and I had built outside the purview of our joint domestic estate plan. Olivia knew about the joint accounts. She had no idea about the safety net I had quietly managed for 30 years. The first hard evidence of her overarching plan arrived via an anonymous encrypted email. The sender was J.R. a former employee of Robert's who had always harbored a suspicion of Olivia's entitled nature. The email contained a single damning attachment, a preliminary document from the Sterling family's private trust lawyer. The document wasn't a standard quitclaim deed. It was a complex, aggressive refinancing and restructuring proposal for the anchor. The house was owned outright, debt-free. The proposal outlined creating a new, non-recourse mortgage for nearly 70% of the property's market value, with the mortgage proceeds immediately funneled into a Sterling Anderson joint venture real estate holding company. The terms were predatory: a balloon payment due in 18 months, and a clause that named Olivia and Victor Sterling as the primary signatories, with Robert listed only as a guarantor, whose interest would be reduced to a life estate upon signing. The stated purpose of the funds? A prenuptial investment fund for Olivia and Victor. It was pure brazen theft. They weren't waiting for Robert to pass away. They were actively extracting the value of the house while he was cognitively vulnerable, essentially turning the house into a high-risk cash machine for their wedding and initial investment. Robert would be left with an unserviceable debt and a severely diminished equity stake. The final piece of this legal coup was the most terrifying. The document required the signature of both joint owners of the home. Robert was listed as the primary joint owner. Helen, was the secondary joint owner. Olivia had fabricated a power of attorney document, allegedly signed by me prior to my trip, granting Robert the power to execute the mortgage documents unilaterally, thus stripping me of my right to refuse. I immediately called Robert. He sounded evasive. "We're just simplifying things, Helen. Victor's lawyer says this is a brilliant tax play. It generates capital without selling the asset. Olivia is so proud of herself. Robert, have you signed anything from Victor's lawyer? Anything that mentions a new mortgage?" I pressed. No, just pre-planning documents," he insisted weakly. "Olivia won't let me sign until you're back," she promised. "She said you need to be here to celebrate the new venture." "Don't worry, dear. They're waiting for you." That promise that they were waiting for me was the final trap. They weren't waiting for my consent. They were waiting for me to be present so they could execute the final documents with Robert, using the fabricated POA to legitimize the entire elaborate scheme. My absence had given them the time to prepare the documents. My return would give them the final, necessary setting for the signing. Olivia had made a mistake typical of the arrogant and entitled. She had confused silence with weakness and a lack of objection with ignorance. The second crucial piece of her plan fell into my hands 2 days later, confirming the depth of her callousness. Robert, still struggling with short-term memory, often forgot to log out of his shared family tablet, which he used primarily for streaming and video calls. I used a backdoor password I had created years ago, known only to me, to access his saved chats and recent activity. I found a file saved on the device's internal storage, a short, 20-minute audio recording, mislabeled Dad's meditation music. I clicked play, bracing myself. It was a recording of a dinner conversation, held in my dining room involving Olivia, Victor, and his parents Helen and Arthur. They were celebrating, and the wine had made them indiscreet. Victor laughingly said, "And your mother Olivia, she's so predictable." The moment Robert's diagnosis came in, she packed her bags to play Florence Nightingale for her own mother. Perfect alibi. She practically handed us the keys. Olivia coldly added, "She's so self-sacrificing, isn't she? It's sickening. All that talk about legacy and family contribution. The truth is the anchor is dead equity. It's worth a fortune sitting empty, but it's worth more leveraged for our startup fund. The Sterling Real Estate Group will absorb this venture in a year, and we will be managing the portfolio. Mom and Dad? They're just the initial collateral." Arthur Sterling, the patriarch, with a dry, calculating tone said, "The poor Victor drafted is airtight, Olivia. It's predicated on the idea that Robert is in full control of his faculties, but aware of his wife's preoccupation. We'll have Robert sign the mortgage papers next week, the moment Helen gets back. It looks legitimate, they sign it together. Then we use the POA backdated to cover Helen's absence on the initial restructuring documents. The moment the funds transfer, Robert will legally be a guest in his own home. Helen Sterling hissing. And the old biddy's desk? Good riddance. It's already been shipped to our Nantucket property. I needed a writing surface that wasn't covered in her smell of ambition. It's essential that Helen understands immediately that she has lost control of the assets, the narrative, and the household. The final sentence, Helen's cruel instruction, was the dagger turning in my gut. The laughter that followed, Olivia's bright, victorious, horrible laugh, was the exact sound I would hear upon my return. It wasn't just financial opportunism. It was a deep, venomous resentment and a desire to humiliate me. They didn't just want the house. They wanted to erase me from it. I sat there 1,500 miles away, holding the tablet, and realized my deep pain had become my daughter's ultimate opportunity. But their arrogance had provided me with two crucial things: the exact legal maneuver they intended, the POA and the mortgage signing, and the emotional confirmation that this was a war for my soul, not just a transaction. The game had changed from defense to offense. Their plan was to have Robert sign the mortgage papers with me present, using the backdated, fabricated POA to cover my initial transfer of authority. They needed my public presence to lend an air of consensus to the event. But now, I had the Sterling's complete financial strategy, their timeline, and the precise nature of the forged document. It was time to activate the contingency plan I had established years before, a strategy known only to 3 people in the world: myself, my longtime corporate lawyer, and the head of the trust department at a private bank in Geneva. My secret weapon was not a single document, but a perfectly engineered, nested legal structure, built for a moment just like this. A move I made 30 years ago when Robert's father, a good man who was terribly manipulated by a gold-digging second wife, lost his entire legacy. I had learned from the best or the worst. I called my corporate lawyer Mr. Alastair Gavin, the only person I trusted with the full picture. "Alastair, they're moving on the Anchor next week," I stated, my voice clinical and devoid of emotion. "The mechanism is a high percentage mortgage under a holding company, backed by a fabricated POA, while Robert is designated as a mere guarantor with a life estate. Helen, I need to know. Is the deed a joint tenancy or community property?" Alastair asked, his voice sharp with professional focus. "Neither. It's a tenancy in common, but it's structured under a very specific covenant, Article 7, Section C of the original land trust deed, the one registered back in '92. The one I purchased the land under before we built the house. They think the current recorded deed is the governing document." Alastair paused. "The original trust declaration? The one that was dissolved and superseded by the 2005 revocable trust?" "Yes and no," I whispered. "The 2005 trust references and incorporates Article 7, Section C, Alastair. It's not superseded. It's activated upon a specific legal event. The specific event, Alastair, is a financial action taken under duress or impaired judgment, which specifically mentions any leveraging action over $5 million initiated by the secondary owner Robert, without the primary owner's, my notarized, physical presence and signature, not a POA. The key was the physical presence clause. A POA could be forged. A physical, notarized signature in front of the bank's head of legal could not. And what happens when Article 7, Section C is activated? Alastair asked, his voice a low blend of curiosity and admiration. The asset, the Anchor, is immediately and legally removed from the 2005 revocable trust and revested, without tax implication, into the Helen Anderson Private Investment Trust, EPIT, which is governed by Swiss law and registered in Geneva, I explained. It's legally untouchable by any domestic, non-court-ordered lien. It makes their mortgage invalid, their POA irrelevant, and their holding company a liability holding no assets. This was the secret weapon. While Olivia had been studying the recent joint estate documents, I had been safeguarding the foundation. My real estate acumen had saved us before, and I had ensured that my biggest personal investment was shielded from both opportunistic third parties and an emotionally compromised Robert. I gave Alastair the final instruction. Olivia has me scheduled to be there for the signing. That means they will be present and they will be celebrating. I want the vesting action executed, sealed, and dated the moment I walk through the door and confirm the presence of the documents. I want the final legal notice of the change of ownership delivered to the Sterling lawyer's office via a court-stamped electronic filing, precisely 30 seconds after the signed documents are presented. We don't want them to get the chance to notarize them. Let the celebration begin. But it will be short-lived. The plane ride home was the quietest I had ever experienced. I wasn't grieving Robert's weakness or Olivia's betrayal. I was finalizing the steps of a meticulously planned financial demolition. I landed, hailed a cab, and returned to the Anchor, not as the unsuspecting victim, but as the executioner. The scene I walked into, Robert crying, Olivia laughing, was not the end of my life, but the opening scene of their reckoning. The moment I dropped my bag and stood motionless in the entryway, the air crackled with a cruel anticipation that was entirely theirs. Robert still wept, ashamed and broken. Olivia, flanked by the Sterlings, was basking in the spotlight. "Helen, come in, darling. Don't be shy," Helen Sterling called out, her voice a theatrical purr. She was the one who initiated the final act of humiliation. "We're just waiting for you to get settled, so we can finalize the paperwork. A celebratory glass of champagne, perhaps." I walked into the dining room past Robert, whose eyes pleaded for my forgiveness, and took the empty seat they had strategically placed at the head of the table, the seat of honor, the seat of the victim. Victor slid the voluminous mortgage document and the accompanying POA across the table. "It's a beautiful moment, Helen," Victor began, playing the smooth, professional lawyer. "The Sterling Group is partnering with your family to unlock the dormant equity of this magnificent property. This is a non-recourse loan against the asset, meaning if anything goes wrong, you and Robert are safe. It's an investment, not a burden." "And the PO, Victor?" I asked, my voice flat, my eyes on Olivia. "Is this the document giving Robert the authority to act on my behalf while I was away?" Victor nodded too quickly. "The one you signed granting temporary conditional power to Robert, yes. It was necessary to expedite the initial underwriting process. We were on a tight timeline." "And who witnessed me sign this?" I asked, picking up the document and examining the signature line. My eyes drifted to Olivia, whose expression was pure, triumphant smugness. "It was notarized remotely, Helen," Olivia interjected smoothly, leaning over the table, her tone laced with contempt. "We needed to move fast. You were busy with Grandma. Frankly, you were an impediment to progress. But you're here now, and all you need to do is sign the final page as the secondary owner, and we can all celebrate our new future." Arthur Sterling, sensing the slight tension, chimed in with authority. "Let's be clear, Helen. This is the new future. Your daughter is a Sterling now, and the Sterling legacy begins with leveraging their assets. You are signing over the future prosperity of your child. A parent's duty, wouldn't you say?" My emotional low point wasn't the signature line. It was the realization that my daughter looked at my love, my sacrifice, and my vulnerability as a weakness to be exploited. She had successfully turned her own father against me, using his fear of incapacity as a weapon. I felt the immense weight of their gazes, their greedy anticipation. They were waiting for me to break, to scream, to lash out, to confirm their belief that I was just the emotional, irrational woman they had dismissed. I took a deep breath, recalling the sound of Olivia's laughter from the recording, the sound that had echoed the hatred in Helen's voice. Picked up the pen. "Wait," Robert croaked, finally finding his voice, though it was wrecked with sobs. He looked at me, utterly defeated. "Helen, don't. I'm sorry. I didn't understand the depth of it. I thought it was just a loan. I saw the schedule of payments. I didn't see the life estate clause. Please stop." Olivia's face turned glacial. "Dad, don't be a geriatric fool. We discussed this. It protects the asset from unnecessary tax exposure." Robert was physically shaking now, his face pale. "It's not protection, Helen. It's a foreclosure trap." I realized when Victor told me I couldn't even use the home equity line without his written consent. They own us. I placed a comforting hand on Robert's, then looked up at Olivia, a flicker of raw, cold fury passing through my eyes. "Too late, Robert," I said softly with a sigh of seeming utter defeat. "It seems my signature is the only thing standing between my daughter and her happiness." I scrawled my name on the final page of the mortgage document. It was a legible, decisive signature. A triumphant cheer erupted from the Sterlings. Victor clapped his hands together, relief washing over his polished face. Olivia threw her head back, that horrible joyous laugh ringing through the room again. "It's done!" Olivia exclaimed. "Finally! Now we just need the notary to stamp the final page, and the wire transfer from the Sterling Trust will execute at 9 a.m. sharp tomorrow. The anchor is officially leveraged." She came around the table and pressed a quick, dry kiss on my cheek. "Thank you, Mom. You were predictable, but in a good way." I met her eyes. There was no victory there, only a hollow void where my love for her used to be. The pain of that moment, the final utter severance of the mother-daughter bond, was my emotional low point. I had physically signed away my home, or so it seemed, to save my husband from a panic attack and to expose my daughter's soul. I felt the utter weight of the loss, real or perceived. Now, in their moment of supreme collective triumph, the antagonists became sloppy. The legal documents were signed. The champagne corks were popping. They were utterly certain they had won. "To the anchor!" Arthur Sterling toasted, raising a crystal flute. "May it generate millions for the next generation of Sterlings." Helen, fueled by arrogance, leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper of pure malice. She wanted to twist the knife one last time, ensuring I understood my powerlessness. "You know, Helen, what I found most amusing about this entire endeavor?" Helen sneered. "That silly, sentimental Louis XV desk of yours. Bryce only offered a pittance for it, really. But the look on your face over the video call? Priceless. We didn't even sell it to a stranger. I'm having it restored and gifted to Olivia as a trophy for the new reading room we're building. Every time she sits at it, she'll be reminded of how easily you crumbled." I remained seated, my face a carefully constructed mask of resignation. "A trophy, Helen? I always thought it was bad form to boast about stealing a family heirloom." "Oh, it wasn't stealing, darling," Olivia chimed in, circling the table like a shark. "It was leverage. And here is the difference between you and me, Mother. You sign documents out of sentiment, out of obligation. I sign them for profit. You wanted to protect Daddy. I wanted the money." She paused, looking at Victor, then back at me, her voice ringing with the final fatal lie. "And you know what the best part is? That fake POA? You did sign it. We had your signature copied from an old insurance document and digitally placed it. But the Sterlings were so powerful, Mom, we didn't even need the fake. We only used it to scare Robert into compliance. Now we have your real, fresh signature on the mortgage, making the POA irrelevant. It's checkmate." This final gloating confession was the crucial error. It was the moment they ceased to be calculating criminals and became arrogant fools. They had lied about the POA being fake. They had lied about needing my signature for validation, intending to use the real signature to supersede the forgery. They were drunk on their perceived success, basking in the belief that they had outsmarted me with an irrelevant, sophisticated ruse. They had no idea that I needed their explicit, admitted knowledge of the POA's dubious nature, combined with my signature on the mortgage document, to activate the failsafe I had built decades ago. My eyes met Robert's across the room. He was still weeping, distraught. But I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod, a command, not a request. He slowly, agonizingly, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The celebration continued for a solid minute, Arthur and Victor reviewing the signed documents with self-satisfied grins, Olivia sipping the champagne like a queen. They completely missed the tiny, almost silent notification that just flashed across Robert's screen. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly, the sound echoing in the silent, tense room. "It seems you all think you've won," I said, my voice calm, but with a terrifying stillness that commanded attention. "You have the signed mortgage. You have the confession. You have the trophy desk. You have everything you wanted. I smiled, a wide, genuine, terrifying smile that reached none of my eyes. Except the house. The Sterling celebratory smiles froze on their faces, turning to expressions of annoyed impatience, as if I were a poor sport delaying the party. Don't be a sore loser, Helen, Victor condescended, placing the signed mortgage documents into his leather briefcase. The house is legally secured as collateral. The funds transfer tomorrow. No, Victor, I said, my voice gaining a terrifying resonance. The document is secured. The house is not. You see, you've all made a series of predictable fundamental errors. The first was believing Robert's diagnosis made him legally incompetent. The second was confusing my sacrifice for my mother with my stupidity. And the final fatal error was to assume the current deed was the only governing document for this land. I walked over to the marble countertop where Robert was standing, still shell-shocked. He lifted his phone and showed me the notification. It was a digital receipt from Alistair Gavin, confirming the filing. Robert, tell them what you just saw on your phone, I commanded. He looked directly at Olivia, his eyes finally clearing, shame giving way to a fierce protective certainty. I just received an electronic filing notification. It's a declaration of revesting. It's from a Swiss trust account. Olivia rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Dad. A Swiss trust? Victor, is she threatening us with an offshore account? Victor, however, had gone pale. His legal mind, already reeling from his mother's careless confession about the fake POA, was calculating the immense danger of an unexpected, foreign entity. Helen, what exactly is this filing? I reached into the inner pocket of my travel blazer and withdrew a single folded piece of paper. Not a thick legal document, but a simple, notarized certificate. This, I said, laying it on the table next to the champagne flutes, is a copy of the original Land Trust Declaration of 1992, for the parcel of land known as the Anchor. Every subsequent deed, including the 2005 revocable trust you examined, incorporates a single critical safeguard, Article 7, Section C. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. The Sterlings were shifting nervously now, the sheer weight of my composure unnerving them. Article 7, Section C is a duress clause, I continued, reciting the wording perfectly. It states that any financial leveraging action exceeding $5 million, initiated by the secondary owner Robert, without the primary owner's my physical, notarized and witness signature at a registered corporate location, automatically and immediately dissolves the asset's tenancy and triggers an irreversible revesting. Victor frowned. But you just signed the mortgage, Helen. We have your signature right here. That invalidates the clause. He tapped the briefcase excitedly. I shook my head slowly, pityingly. You missed the most important word, Victor. Physical, notarized and witness signature at a registered corporate location. You had me sign the document here in my dining room, after a 3-month absence. That alone breaches the condition. Olivia laughed, a desperate, brittle sound. You're splitting hairs, Mom. It's semantics. We have the intent, and we have the signature. No, Olivia. I corrected her, my voice turning to steel. You have the consequences. And this is where your mother, Helen, helped me more than anyone. Robert and I had always debated if Article 7 should stay active. It was Robert's fear of cognitive impairment that kept it alive. He knew he was vulnerable to undue influence, and he explicitly told me he wanted a nuclear option if his judgment was compromised. I walked over to the dining room sideboard and picked up the tablet Robert had used. And thanks to this recording, I can prove his judgment was in fact severely compromised, not by illness, but by your deliberate systematic manipulation. I played the audio clip for the room. Helen's smug voice confessing to the forgery of the POA and Olivia's triumphant declaration that they had used the POA to scare Robert into compliance. That confession, I stated, switching off the device, combined with the signed mortgage document created in a non-compliant location, automatically and instantly activated Article 7, Section C. At the moment I placed my name on that paper, confirming the financial action under duress. I turned to Robert and smiled warmly. I needed to sign it, Robert, because I needed to make their crime concrete and actionable before I could destroy it. You see, the moment I signed that document in this room, the anchor was legally, irrevocably, and immediately removed from the 2005 revocable trust. I picked up the signed mortgage document from Victor's open briefcase and tore it meticulously into thin strips. As of 45 seconds ago, when the revesting declaration was filed in Geneva, this deed is now collateral on a property owned by the Helen Anderson Private Investment Trust, EPIT, I announced. The EPIT is a fully protected, non-domiciled entity. Your mortgage, Victor, is now nothing more than a lien against an entity governed by Swiss law that has zero obligation to recognize your domestic debt. Your holding company just bought an $8 million liability secured against a piece of paper that references an entity that no longer owns the collateral. The air went dead silent. Arthur Sterling, the patriarch, collapsed heavily into his chair, his ruddy face turning a sickly gray. Helen's eyes were wide and manic. Olivia looked at the torn paper, then at me, her initial shock morphing into volcanic, blinding rage. "You bitch!" she shrieked, lunging forward. "You cold, calculating bitch! You planned this! You let us!" Victor grabbed her arm, his face rigid with professional horror. "Olivia, stop! Don't say another word!" Victor knew. He knew the confession had just damned his entire family's legal maneuverings. The mortgage itself was worthless, but the audio recording of their criminal intent to forge a POA, backed by the father's testimony of undue influence, was now evidence of conspiracy. "Arthur, the collateral is gone. We put up $500,000 in escrow to guarantee the initial underwriting," Victor stammered to his father. "It's gone. It's all gone. And the Sterling Group is now facing a lawsuit for predatory lending and attempted fraud on an incapacitated party, backed by wiretapped evidence." Helen, the cruelest of them all, was the first to dissolve. She was no longer the smug society matron. She was a crumbling, painted gargoyle. "Arthur, we can't be ruined. We can't lose the Nantucket property. We mortgaged the vacation home for the escrow." She began to weep. Not tears of sorrow but tears of pure financial terror. Olivia didn't weep. She stood rigid, staring at me with a hatred so profound, so personal, it eclipsed any residual memory of our shared past. "You were supposed to be the weak one. You were supposed to be the sentimental fool who just let us have it." "No, Olivia," I said gently, stepping closer to her, making sure Robert was safely behind me. "I was the architect. I built the house and I built the wall around it. You just kept signing documents that proved your greed, while I signed the one document that proved my intelligence. You wanted a financial contract, not a family bond. Congratulations, you got the contract." I looked at Arthur and Helen, who were silently gathering their crumpled documents. "Get out of my house. Now, if you ever come near Robert or me again, Alistair Gavin will file a police report with the audio evidence and the forged POA immediately." Arthur, defeated, simply nodded, hauling his wife out of her chair. They stumbled toward the door, their grand plan reduced to an ignominious retreat. Olivia remained, her eyes burning into me. "You ruined my life. Victor will leave me. The Sterlings will cut me off. I get nothing." "You got exactly what you earned, Olivia," I stated plainly. "You were cut out of the 2005 revocable trust the day you used your father's fear to try and sell my desk, the moment you proved you only saw us as a closing transaction. The funds I transferred to you 6 months ago? They were a test. You failed. Every penny you've spent out of those accounts since I left will now be subject to a clawback lawsuit for misappropriation of funds from a dependent's account." I looked at Robert, who was finally standing tall, the tears dried by the swift, cleansing wind of my victory. "And as for the Louis XV desk, Olivia, the one you considered a trophy?" I continued. "I had Alistair file a replevin action with the Nantucket Police Department an hour ago. It will be seized from Helen's reading room by morning, and returned here, where it belongs. I will be sure to send the moving bill to Victor." I pointed toward the front door. "Now get out of my house. You are no longer welcome here. Your key is invalid, and your name is not on the mail." Consider this your final transaction. Olivia stood there for a long, terrible moment, her hatred so potent it felt like a physical heat. Then she let out a choked sob of utter, complete defeat and fled, slamming the front door behind her. The front door slammed shut on Olivia's ruin, leaving an unnatural silence in the anchor. Robert and I stood in the wreckage of the dining room, torn paper, spilled champagne, and the ghosts of the Sterling's greed. Robert walked slowly to me, not as the victim, but as my partner. "Helen," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I am so sorry. I allowed my fear to blind me, and I allowed her entitlement to flourish. I should have trusted you, not her." I placed my hands on his face, feeling the familiar dear wrinkles. "It's over, Robert. They preyed on your kindness and your vulnerability. You are a good man, Robert, and that's not a weakness. It's just bad armor. I built the proper shield." We spent the next week not fighting legal battles. Alistair was handling the quiet, efficient legal cleanup, but physically and emotionally reclaiming our home. We removed all trace of Olivia's improvements, including the aggressive new security system. Robert, relieved of the crushing guilt and the financial anxiety that had been accelerated by the Sterlings, seemed to improve instantly. His memory lapses became less frequent. His old humor began to flicker back. 6 months later, the Louis XV desk was back in the study, restored to its former glory. The anchor was legally untouchable, nestled safely within the Geneva Trust. Robert and I had officially retired, selling our business shares and liquidating all easily accessible assets. We bought a magnificent, classic cruising yacht, which we named the Codicil. Our new life was one of sun-drenched freedom, charting a course for the Mediterranean. "No mortgage, no trusts, just clear water," Robert laughed, standing at the helm on a brilliant August morning off the coast of Italy. I watched him, my heart full. We had not been financially or emotionally ruined. We had been refined. Our marriage had survived the ultimate betrayal by relying on the one thing Olivia had dismissed, the foundational trust we built decades ago. The deep pain of the diagnosis had forced me to build a stronger framework for our life, and Olivia's greed had inadvertently stress-tested the integrity of that framework, proving it unbreakable. Our lawyer Alistair occasionally sent an encrypted update. Victor Sterling had terminated his engagement with Olivia and had severed all professional ties, realizing his career could not withstand a public association with a documented family fraud. He had lost his initial $500,000 investment in the doomed holding company, and Arthur Sterling was fighting bankruptcy, his private fortune significantly depleted by the required settlements to Robert and I for legal expenses and emotional distress. Olivia was the final mention. The last I saw of her was a fleeting low-resolution image Alistair sent, a public court filing photo. She was working a low-wage, non-corporate job in a city far from ours, still wearing the expensive, ill-fitting clothes of her former life. The photo captured her walking out of a dingy office building, her face etched with a look of permanent, venomous regret. The entitlement was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed resentment. She hadn't learned a lesson. She had only learned that her mother was smarter and richer than she was. Her hatred was a tangible thing, but it was distant, powerless, and tragically too late. She had chosen a life of contract over family, and the contract had been voided by the original author. I raised a glass of Tuscan wine to Robert, the sunlight glinting off the Mediterranean. "To the Codicil," I murmured. Robert raised his glass. "And to the simple truth, Helen. The moral of the story is the knowledge that they will only value what you've built if they believe they can take it from you. But true power lies in the invisible foundation that only you know how to dismantle and restore."